The crystalline beings of the Etherean Commonwealth floated in their biochambers like living glass sculptures. Their bodies were clear as water, and when they felt scared or worried, colorful lights would pulse through them like tiny lightning storms. Commander Veltara was one of these beautiful creatures, but right now her clear body was flashing red with panic. She pressed her delicate hands against the viewing window of her command center and watched something terrible happening to her homeworld below. The planet that had once been covered in floating gardens and crystal cities was now turning brown and dead. Giant black ships shaped like mechanical spiders were sucking the life right out of everything green and living. These were the Void Ravagers, and they were like a plague of metal locusts that ate entire worlds. They had already destroyed dozens of Etherean colonies, turning lush garden planets into empty rocks floating in space. The Ethereans had tried to fight back with their pretty energy weapons that shot beams of pure light, but it was like trying to stop a tank with a flashlight. The Ravagers just absorbed the energy and kept coming. Veltara's voice came out like the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze when she spoke to her communications officer. Send out the emergency signal to every world in the galaxy. Tell them, we need help. Tell them we're dying. The distress call went out across thousands of star systems, carrying a simple message that any species could understand. The Ethereans were peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. They grew the most beautiful gardens in the galaxy and shared their knowledge freely with all who asked. Now they were being wiped out by machines that cared nothing for beauty or life. Most of the big galactic powers ignored the call. The proud Centaurians were too busy with their own wars. The wealthy mercantile union said it wasn't profitable to help. The wise Council of Minds declared it was not their problem to solve. One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy turned their backs on the dying Ethereans. But then something unexpected happened. A crackling radio signal came from a small, unimportant star system that most galactic maps didn't even label properly. The voice that came through was rough and gravelly, speaking in simple words that somehow carried more strength than all the fancy speeches from the great powers. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Retribution. We got your message loud and clear. Don't worry, help is coming your way. The signal was weak and full of static, coming from ships that were probably held together with spare parts and stubbornness. But there was something in that human voice that made Veltara's crystalline heart beat faster with hope. At the Galactic Council headquarters, Ambassador Thexler looked at his holographic display, showing the human response, and literally laughed out loud. His blue tentacles wiggled with amusement as he spoke to his fellow council members. Humans, those crazy Deathworld savages. They barely figured out how to travel faster than light 200 years ago. Their ships look like flying scrapyards. What could a bunch of primitive barbarians possibly do against the Void Ravagers that our advanced civilizations cannot? The other ambassadors joined in the laughter. Everyone knew humans came from a world so dangerous that most galactic species would die just from breathing the air there. Earth had deadly weather, poisonous plants, and animals that seemed designed purely to kill things. The humans who survived such a nightmare planet were considered mentally unstable by galactic standards. But Commander Veltara didn't laugh. She had studied the files on these strange Deathworld creatures, while other species had evolved on Paradise. Worlds with gentle weather and friendly animals. Humans had spent millions of years fighting just to stay alive. Every single day on their homeworld was a battle against nature itself. Maybe, just maybe, creatures who had learned to survive the impossible could teach the Ravagers what real fighting looked like. Admiral Lisa Hayes had the kind of face that told stories without words. Deep lines around her eyes spoke of countless battles fought in the darkness between stars. Scars on her hands showed years of working with weapons that could crack planets in half. She stood perfectly still on the bridge of her massive warship, the Iron Will, watching the horror unfolding on the screens in front of her. The tactical display showed the Etherian homeworld like a patient dying on an operating table. Black mechanical ships swarmed around the beautiful crystal cities like hungry vultures. Every few seconds, another section of the planet would go dark, as the Void Ravagers sucked out all the life force and left behind nothing but empty rock. Standing next to Hayes was an Etherian liaison officer, his translucent body flickering with nervous rainbow colors. His name was something humans couldn't pronounce, so the crew just called him Crystal. He had volunteered to come aboard the human ship to help coordinate the rescue mission, though he was starting to wonder if that had been a mistake. "I don't understand your strategy, Admiral," Crystal said, his voice sounding like music played on glass instruments. "Our most advanced energy weapons simply bounce off their adaptive shielding. The Ravagers learn from every attack and become immune to it within minutes. How do you plan to break through defenses that can adapt to any energy signature?" Hayes turned away from the display and looked out the main view screen at her fleet. What Crystal saw there made his crystalline form dim with worry. The human ships looked absolutely nothing like the beautiful, flowing vessels used by every other species in the galaxy. Where Etherian ships were like flying works of art, smooth and graceful, the human warships looked like someone had taken a city block and taught it how to fly. The Iron Will alone was bigger than most space stations. Its hull was covered in thick armor plating that had been scorched and dented by countless battles. Gun turrets stuck out at every angle like the spines on some prehistoric monster. Missile launchers lined the sides in neat rows, each one capable of carrying warheads that could flatten mountains. The whole ship looked like it had been designed by someone whose only goal was to destroy things as efficiently as possible. "See, that's your problem right there," Hayes said, pointing at the graceful Etherian rescue ships floating nearby. "Your people make everything pretty. Don't get me wrong, they're beautiful ships. Look like flying flowers dancing in space. But you built them to explore and discover and make friends with the universe." She gestured toward her own fleet with a grim smile. "We built ours to kill things that need killing." Crystal's body pulsed with confusion, but the adaptive shielding technology is theoretically impenetrable. Even our greatest scientists cannot find a way through it. Hayes walked over to the weapons control station and ran her scarred hand along the targeting computer. "Kid, let me tell you something about humans. We've been killing things that were bigger, stronger, and smarter than us since we first picked up rocks and started throwing them at saber-toothed tigers. We didn't survive on Earth by being the prettiest or the smartest. We survived by being too damn stubborn to die." She pulled up a display showing the specifications for the Iron Will's main gun. Crystal's eyes went wide when he saw the numbers. The weapon didn't fire energy beams or plasma bolts like civilized weapons. Instead, it launched solid chunks of metal at speeds that approached the speed of light itself. "Your energy weapons try to penetrate their shields," Hayes explained patiently. "That's thinking like a civilized person. But we're not civilized, Crystal. We don't try to get through their defenses." She paused and looked directly at the alien with eyes that had seen too many wars. "We just hit them so hard that it doesn't matter what kind of shields they have. You can't adapt to a 20-ton tungsten rod moving at 10% light speed. Physics doesn't care how smart your computer is." Crystal stared at the brutal human weapon systems and finally began to understand why his people's desperate message had been answered by these strange, violent creatures from the edge of civilized space. Sometimes the monsters you needed to fight other monsters. The space around the Etherian homeworld had been quiet for months, filled only with the mechanical humming of Ravager harvesting ships, slowly draining the life from the beautiful crystal cities below. The alien machines had grown comfortable in their work, their adaptive shields glowing softly as they absorbed the weak energy attacks from the few remaining Etherian defense ships. Then the humans arrived, and everything changed in the span of a heartbeat. Admiral Hayes gave the order, with just two simple words: "Open fire." What happened next was like watching a thunderstorm made of pure destruction. The human fleet didn't test the waters with careful, precise shots like every other civilized species would do. Instead, every single ship opened up at exactly the same moment with every weapon they had. The Iron Will's main cannon fired first, launching a chunk of tungsten the size of a small car, at speeds that made light look slow. The projectile hit the nearest Ravager mothership and didn't just penetrate the adaptive shielding. It went through the entire ship and out the other side, leaving a perfectly round hole that you could fly a fighter through. But that was just the beginning. Hundreds of smaller railguns joined in, filling space with a deadly rain of metal slugs, each one hit with the force of a meteor strike. The Ravager's shields, designed to adapt to energy weapons, had no idea what to do with simple chunks of metal moving at impossible speeds. Nuclear missiles followed right behind, painting the darkness with brilliant white flashes. These weren't the clean, precise explosives that civilized worlds used for mining operations. These were weapons designed by a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of making things explode as violently as possible. Captain Tom Bradley stood on the bridge of his destroyer, the Hammer of Justice, watching the light show with professional satisfaction. His ship was small compared to the massive dreadnoughts, but it carried enough firepower to level a city. Right now, it was adding its voice to the symphony of destruction, pumping missile after missile into the confused Ravager fleet. "Sir, the enemy mothership is trying to adapt its shields to our kinetic weapons," his tactical officer reported. Bradley laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Let them try. Focus all batteries on that big ugly one in the center. Tell the Roosevelt and the Constitution to do the same." 3 human dreadnoughts turned their attention to a single Ravager mothership that was desperately trying to reconfigure its defenses. The alien machine intelligence inside was processing data at incredible speeds, analyzing the human attacks and attempting to create countermeasures. But how do you adapt to being hit by what was essentially a very fast, very heavy rock? The concentrated firepower from 3 of humanity's largest warships struck the Ravager vessels simultaneously. The alien ship, which had been the size of a small city, simply ceased to exist. Where there had been a sophisticated piece of technology, there was now just expanding debris and confused energy readings. But the real surprise was still coming. While the main fleet kept the Ravager ships busy with overwhelming firepower, smaller human vessels had been moving into position for boarding actions. This was something no civilized species had ever attempted, actually getting inside an enemy ship during a battle and fighting room by room. Colonel Mike Rodriguez led the first boarding party, his Marines encased in power armor that made them look like walking tanks. They cut through the hull of a damaged Ravager ship with plasma torches and poured inside like an unstoppable tide of destruction. The corridors of the alien ship were filled with mechanical defenders, robots designed to repel boarders with precise, efficient movements. They had expected energy weapons and careful tactics from any species brave enough to board their vessel. Instead, they got humans with shotguns. "Remember the rules, people." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio as his Marines spread through the ship. "When in doubt, use more explosives. When really in doubt, use way more explosives." The mechanical defenders tried to adapt to the human tactics, but there was nothing to adapt to. The Marines weren't using sophisticated strategies or advanced technology. They were just walking forward and shooting everything that moved, while throwing grenades into any room that looked suspicious. "Rodriguez to all squads," the colonel's voice came through again, sounding almost cheerful. "I found their main computer core. Setting charges now." The Ravager ship exploded from the inside out, taking with it centuries of accumulated knowledge and adaptive programming. Across the battlefield, the same scene was playing out over and over. The machine intelligence that had conquered dozens of worlds was learning a hard lesson about fighting a species that had never learned to fight fair. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The surviving Ravager ships, those few that hadn't been blown apart or boarded by human marines, were now running away as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. But they weren't retreating like a beaten army. They were fleeing like prey animals that had just encountered their worst nightmare. Commander Amy Foster sat hunched over her computer terminal in the intelligence section of the Iron Will, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she tried to make sense of the massive data streams her team had intercepted. Foster was the kind of person who could find patterns in chaos, and right now she was seeing something that made her blood run cold. "Admiral Hayes, to the bridge, please," she called over the ship's communication system, her voice tight with urgency. When Hayes arrived, she found Foster surrounded by screens showing scrolling alien text and incomprehensible symbols. The intelligence officer looked up with wide eyes that held a mixture of excitement and deep concern. "Ma'am, we intercepted the final transmissions before they jumped to hyperspace," Foster began, her words coming fast with nervous energy. "Our computers have been working on translating their machine language, and what we found, well, you need to see this." She pressed a button, and the alien symbols on the main screen shifted into readable English text. What Hayes read there made her step backward, as if she'd been physically hit. The message was simple and terrifying. "Emergency protocol activated. Extinction event species confirmed. All units withdraw immediately. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the Deathworld species under any circumstances." "They're not running because we beat them," Foster continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're running because they're absolutely terrified of us. Look at this." Another screen lit up, showing what appeared to be a massive database entry. At the top, in letters that somehow managed to look ominous, even when translated into English, were the words, "Species Classification, Humanity Class 12 Extinction Event." Below that was a description that made everyone on the bridge go quiet. "Species demonstrates terminal aggression patterns, capable of total warfare, escalation. Elimination of this species is impossible through conventional means. Historical precedent suggests complete avoidance is the only viable survival strategy." Dr. Robert Kane, the fleet's chief scientist and expert on alien biology, leaned over Foster's shoulder to read the data. Kane was a thin, bookish man who usually spent his time studying peaceful alien plants and harmless space creatures. Right now, his face was pale as he absorbed what he was seeing. "There's more," Foster said, pulling up another section of the intercepted data. "They have historical records going back 50,000 years. Look at this entry." The screen showed what appeared to be an ancient report, filed so long ago that even the machine language looked different. But the translation was clear enough. Harvesting operation on Sol-3 terminated with extreme prejudice. Local bipedal species demonstrated unprecedented resistance patterns. Total loss of harvesting fleet. Recommend permanent classification as forbidden zone. Admiral Hayes stared at the screen for a long moment, her mind working through the implications. 50,000 years ago, she said slowly. Back when we were still hunting with stone spears and living in caves. "It gets worse," Kane said, his voice shaking slightly. "According to their records, we didn't just fight them off. We hunted down every single one of their ships and destroyed them completely. They call it the Terra incident in their files, and it's marked as their worst military disaster in recorded history." Foster pulled up another screen, showing what looked like a tactical analysis. "The Ravagers are a collective machine intelligence that's been conquering worlds for hundreds of thousands of years. They've faced every kind of enemy you can imagine. Energy beings, hive minds, species with technology so advanced it might as well be magic. But they've never encountered anything like humans. What makes us so different?" Hayes asked, though she was starting to suspect she already knew the answer. Kane looked at the Admiral with something that might have been fear in his eyes. "Every other species they've fought had limits, Admiral, rules they wouldn't break, lines they wouldn't cross. When things got bad enough, they would surrender or negotiate or try to run away and hide. He paused, staring at the data scrolling across the screens. But humans don't have those limits. When we're threatened, when our families and our homes are in danger, we don't stop fighting until the threat is completely eliminated. We don't negotiate with things that want to kill us. We kill them first. Foster nodded, grimly. According to their analysis, we're what they call a terminal warfare species. We escalate conflicts to their absolute maximum, and we never, ever give up. From their perspective, we're not just dangerous, we're the most dangerous thing in the galaxy because we literally cannot be defeated through normal means. Hayes walked to the viewing window and looked out at the stars, thinking about humanity's long, violent history. Every war, every battle, every desperate last stand had been preparation for this moment, even though none of them had known it at the time. So we're there, bogeymen, she said finally. The monster they tell scary stories about, in whatever passes for their dreams. Kane nodded. We're not just warriors, Admiral. According to their files, we're their worst nightmare made real. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a sight that still took human breath away, even after 6 months of negotiations. The massive space station rotated slowly in orbit around the neutral world of Kepler Prime, its crystal walls offering a perfect view of the star-filled cosmos beyond. Inside the main assembly hall, representatives from hundreds of different species floated in their specialized atmospheric chambers, each one designed to keep its occupant comfortable in their preferred environment. Admiral Hayes stood at the center podium, looking small and fragile compared to the towering aliens around her, but everyone in that chamber knew better now. They had all heard the stories about what happened to the Void Rat. Some had even seen the battle recordings that showed human ships tearing through the supposedly invincible machine fleet like it was made of paper. The Admiral's uniform was crisp and clean, but the scars on her hands and the lines around her eyes told the real story. This was someone who had spent her entire life learning how to win wars that other people said couldn't be won. The Terran Defense Corps is now officially operational, Hayes announced, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. To every species present, we will patrol the major trade routes and respond to any existential threats that conventional forces cannot handle. Any member species can request our assistance through proper diplomatic channels. The chamber was unusually quiet. Normally, Galactic Council sessions were filled with debate and argument as different species tried to protect their own interests. Today, everyone just listened with careful attention to every word the human said. Ambassador Jennifer Walsh stood nearby, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Walsh had spent the last 6 months living on this station, working 18-hour days to hammer out the details of humanity's new role in galactic society. She was a diplomat by training, but she had learned to speak the language that these aliens understood, the language of controlled violence and carefully managed fear. The negotiations had been unlike anything in galactic history. Usually, when a new species joined the galactic community, they had to prove they were civilized enough to play by everyone else's rules. But humanity had proven something entirely different. They had shown that sometimes the old rules didn't work, and when that happened, you needed people who were willing to break those rules completely. The Defense Treaty has been ratified by all major powers, Walsh had explained to Hayes earlier that morning. They get our protection from threats like the Ravagers. We get access to their technology, their trade networks, and most importantly, we get to be part of the galactic community instead of being treated like dangerous savages on the edge of civilized space. Now, as Hayes finished her presentation, she could see the complex mix of emotions on the alien faces around her. There was respect there, certainly respect earned through demonstrated capability in battle. But there was also fear, the kind of deep, instinctive fear that prey animals feel when they're in the presence of a predator that has decided not to eat them today. The Centaurian ambassador, A tall creature with blue skin and elegant tentacles raised one appendage to speak. Admiral Hayes, how can we be certain that humanity will limit its military actions to defensive operations? Your species has demonstrated considerable enthusiasm for warfare. Hayes smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Ambassador Thex, let me be very clear about something. We didn't ask for this job. 6 months ago, most of you were calling us primitive barbarians who should be quarantined to our own star system. But when the chips were down and civilized warfare wasn't working, you came running to the barbarians for help. She gestured toward the viewing windows, where sleek human patrol ships could be seen launching from the station's military docks. Those ships out there aren't conquest fleets. They're patrol boats, designed to keep the trade routes safe and respond to distress calls. But make no mistake, if something like the Ravager shows up again, we'll do whatever it takes to stop them. Later, as Hayes walked through the station's diplomatic quarter with Captain Jake Morrison, she noticed how the other species representatives reacted to their presence. Conversations would pause as they approached. Crowds would part to let them pass. Eyes would follow them with a mixture of gratitude and nervous wariness. Feels strange, doesn't it? Morrison said as they reached the observation deck overlooking the launch bays. 6 months ago, they wouldn't even return our diplomatic messages. Now they're practically begging us to protect them. Hayes watched another human patrol ship undocked from the station. Its angular hull, bristling with weapon systems that most galactic species considered barbarically crude but undeniably effective. We've been the galaxy's boogeyman for 2 centuries, Jake. Every species out there had stories about the crazy Deathworlders, who solved every problem with bigger guns and more explosives. She leaned against the railing, thinking about humanity's long journey from isolated outcasts to reluctant guardians. But sometimes that's exactly what you need. Sometimes the monsters are what keep the real monsters away. Morrison nodded, understanding the weight of what they had taken on. Think we can handle it? Being the good guys for once? Hayes smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. We've spent 1,000,000 years learning how to be the most dangerous thing in the room. Maybe it's time we learned how to be the most dangerous thing in the room that actually gives a damn about protecting people. Far out in the depths of space, the surviving Ravager units sent their final warning to any artificial intelligence that might be listening. The message was simple and terrifying. The Deathworld species has returned to active status. Avoid all contact. Survival probability against human forces, 0%. The galaxy had found its guardians, and for the first time in eons, the trade routes were truly safe.